Well, good morning, everyone. You have noticed I am not Shelley. They are a little taller. My name is Patrice Koelsch, and when Shelley is indisposed with either a summer cold or something like that. So when they asked me if I could sub this morning, that night, I dreamt that I did sub, and I got here, and when I said I'm not Shelley, all but 8 people left the room. So thank you for not leaving the room. Is there anyone who is here for the first time? Welcome, welcome. I'm so happy to have you. And anyone else? Oh, welcome. And what is your name, please? Me? And your name? Say that again. Bear. Okay, lovely to meet you, Bear. And anyone online here for the first time? Well, anyway, welcome everyone. I hope you'll really feel part of our community here. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement that common ground is sited on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homeland of the Dakota people. And this land holds great historical, spiritual, and personal significance to its original inhabitants and their descendants who live here today and to future generations. We acknowledge the sovereignty of Native nations and our obligations to live up to treaty agreements. It is our intention to rectify the harms that we have committed and those that we continue to commit. This land acknowledgement is only one small part of supporting Indigenous communities. It is our hope that our land acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand with us in solidarity with Native nations and to amplify the voices of Indigenous people seeking grassroots change. And as many of you know, we really are very close to the most sacred site in Dakota cosmology, the confluence of the Minnesota and the Mississippi, the Vedote. In Dakota cosmology, that's where the original people emerged. And so for many years, centuries, Dakota women would travel, pregnant women would travel there. So when they had their children, they would see the same light that the first people saw. So we are truly in very, very sacred land. And in this sacred space, we have a responsibility to really investigate the harms that we have done and those we continue to do. So thank you for your consideration of that. So today we're going to begin with, I'll have a 30-minute sit, and I'll do some guiding in the beginning, and then 5 or so minutes before the end, I'm going to do a little more guiding that relates to the topic that I'm going to be talking about today, which are the contemplations for daily remembrance. So make yourselves as comfortable as you can. This is not the Breath Olympics. And enjoy your practice. And as the sound of the bell fades, just first let yourself appreciate the support that we give to and get from each other just by coming together, whether it's in person or virtually, coming together with these intentions of non-harming, with these intentions of being aware and waking up in our lives. And we can just feel for a moment the support that we give to and get from each other by coming together in this way. And then I invite you to bring the attention into the body with a very kindly, curious awareness. Coming into the body, which is in many ways our vehicle for waking up. And just seeing what's there. You might want to do a little body scan, or there may be some part of the body right now that is asking for your kindly attention. Just bringing this kindly awareness to the body just as it is right now. No need to fix or improve. Just seeing how it is. And in the same way, I invite you to just gently shift your attention to the mind. And again, with a kindly awareness, just notice how the mind is right now. It might be racing, it might be dull, sleepy, interested. And just see if we can bring a kindly awareness to noticing how the mind is right now. Often in meditation, in mindfulness meditation in particular, where we are letting ourselves be just aware of what's actually going on in the present moment, we somehow miss the striving that's going on. So just notice if the mind is trying to achieve some sort of particular state. You might be striving to be completely calm. So just notice, without judgment, how is the mind right now? And if your usual support for staying aware of the present moment's experience is to stay with the breath or with hearing or a bodily sensation, feel free to continue with whatever supports that moment-to-moment awareness. You could also, if you would like, just try to have an open awareness. An awareness that is untethered, that recognizes what arises and what passes away in the moment. And it might be a sensation, a thought, a memory, We practice not clinging. And we practice starting over again and again and again as we find ourselves caught by a story, by a judgment, by a memory. And every time we're aware that we're caught, that's a moment of mindfulness. So we just let go and start again with what is really in our awareness in the present moment. So let's practice for a while in silence. And for the last part of our meditation, we'll reflect on the 5 subjects for daily contemplation. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that aging is a part of life. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that aging is a part of life. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that getting sick is a part of life. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that getting sick is a part of life. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that dying is a part of life. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that dying is a part of life. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that loss is a part of life. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that loss is a part of life. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that I am the inheritor of my past actions, the owner of my present actions, and the fabricator of my future actions. My actions are the ground on which I stand. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that I am the inheritor of my past actions, the owner of my present actions, and the fabricator of my future actions. My actions are the ground on which I stand. And let's just reflect on that for a few minutes. Oh, thank you for your practice, and please stretch as you need to. That formulation of the five remembrances is, I've heard it offered by two British Dharma teachers, Carolyn Jones and Zohar Levy. So I wanted to give them credit for that. Is this better? It's going to be better? Okay. Now, is this going to work for everyone? And if you can't hear me, please do something like this, and I will remember to speak up. This is better? Okay. All right. Thank you. I want to talk about skillfully working with these five reflections. And I'm going to begin actually by reading the Buddha's words on this. And this is one of the suttas, the sutta subjects for contemplation. For people who are unfamiliar with the Buddhist scriptures, they were, the words of the Buddha were, it was part of an oral tradition. They were not written down until several hundred years after the Buddha taught. So there's a lot of repetition in the suttas because it was an oral tradition, and that's a way of remembering this. So the Buddha says, there are five facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or a man, lay or ordained. Which five? I am subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging. This is the first fact that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or a man, lay or ordained. I am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness. I am subject to death, have not gone beyond death. I will grow indifferent, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related to my actions, and have my actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do, for good or for evil, to that I will fall heir. These are the 5 facts that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or a man, lay or ordained. Now, based on what line of reasoning should one often reflect that I am subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging? There are beings who are intoxicated with the typical youth's intoxication with youth. Because of that intoxication with youth, they conduct themselves in a bad way, in body, in speech, and in mind. But when they often reflect on that fact, that youth's intoxication with youth will be entirely abandoned or grow weaker. Now, based on what line of reasoning should one often reflect that I am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness? There are beings who are intoxicated with the typical healthy person's intoxication with health. Because of that intoxication with health, they conduct themselves in a bad way, in body, in speech, and in mind. But when they reflect on that fact, that healthy person's intoxication with health will either be entirely abandoned or grow weaker. Now, based on what line of reasoning should one often reflect that I am, excuse me, subject to death, have not gone beyond death? There are beings who are intoxicated with the typical living person's intoxication with life. Because of that intoxication with life, they conduct themselves in a bad way, in body, in speech, and in mind. But when they often reflect on that fact, that living person's intoxication with life will either be entirely abandoned or will grow weaker. Now, based on what line of reasoning should one often reflect that I will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me? There are beings who feel desire and passion for the things they find dear and appealing. Because of that passion, they conduct themselves in a bad way, in speech, in body, and in mind. But when they often reflect on that fact, that desire for the things they find dear and appealing will either be entirely abandoned or grow weaker. Now, based on what line of reasoning should one reflect? I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and have my actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do, for good or for evil, to that I will fall heir. There are beings who conduct themselves in a bad way, in body, in speech, and in mind. But when they often reflect on that fact, the bad conduct in body and speech and mind will be either entirely abandoned or grow weaker. Now, a disciple of the noble ones considers this: I am not the only one subject to aging who has not gone beyond aging. To the extent that there are beings, past and future, passing away and re-arising, all beings are subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging. When he or she often reflects on this, the factors of the path take birth. He or she sticks with that path, develops it, cultivates it. As he or she sticks with that path, develops it, and cultivates it, the fetters are abandoned, the obsessions destroyed. Further, a disciple of the noble ones considers this: I'm not the only one subject to illness who's not gone beyond illness. I'm not the only one subject to death who has not gone beyond death. I am not the only one who will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. A disciple of the noble ones considers this: I am not the only one who is the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and have my actions as my arbitrator, who, Whatever I do, for good or for evil, to that I will fall heir. To the extent that there are beings, past and future, passing away and re-arising, all beings are the owner of their actions, heir to their actions, born of their actions, related through their actions, and have their actions as their arbitrator. Whatever they do, for good or for evil, to that they will fall heir. When he or she often reflects on this, the factors of the path take birth. He or she sticks with that path, develops it, cultivates it. As he or she sticks with that path, develops it, and cultivates it, the fetters are abandoned and the obsessions destroyed. So this is a very powerful, powerful image of intoxication, that we are intoxicated with youth, intoxicated with health, and intoxicated with vitality, intoxicated with our possessions, our relationships, and our passions. So I'm going to go through each of the 5 of these and talk about how we might skillfully think about them, how we might work with them, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how I personally have worked with them. So the first is the denial of, denial of aging, which is also the denial of illness and infirmity. And that there's the opposite of intoxication is sobriety. That when we sober up, we see the harm that this denial causes. Then we will embrace the eightfold path, which is wise understanding, wise intention, wise action, wise speech, wise livelihood, wise effort, wise mindfulness, and wise concentration. So how do we sober up? And I think the first thing for me is to really reflect on this, on the intoxication, breathing gently. I lovingly remember that aging is a part of life, that I am getting old. And in many ways, getting old is a good thing. You're sort of lucky if you get to be old and not die young. And I do think that one of the benefits of getting older is you don't take things so personally. You just don't take things so personally. You have an accretion of experience, and you understand that sometimes you were just in the place when the oatmeal hit the fan, and you were the person who was the showered, who was the recipient. And it's the Buddha lived into his 80s, and in some of the stories, his attendant Ananda, when he is old and he is infirm, and Ananda says to him, Venerable Sir, your skin has gotten really dull. You no longer sort of have that glowing. Your skin is loose and it's dull. And the Buddha was subject to aging and to illness. And one of the things, one of my personal meditations about aging is that, I do not have the body that I had when I was 50, 25 years younger. And sometimes I just, I catch myself and, ugh, that sort of, that moment of disappointment in some ways with one's physical being. And what I have done is I have what I call my old dog body meditation. And I have had dogs throughout my lifetime. I cannot imagine living without dogs in my life. And I just have been reflecting on how many dogs I have had that have gotten really old and really kind of decrepit. And, and I think about how much I loved them and I loved their old dog bodies. It wasn't that, and my dog, I have now a 12-year-old miniature Australian Shepherd, a very
a rescue who is who will always be very hypervigilant and shy, but she's now, her back is a little swayed now, and she's got much more gray, and she's had a lot of doggy dentistry, so she's missing a canine, her tongue hangs out, and and I think about how much I love that old dog with her body, and I don't see her and think, oh, I wish you had the body you had when you were 6 or 7. And when I reflect on my other dogs, like I remember them being old, and I think about how much I love them and their old dog body. So the question for me is, why can't I love my old person body in the way that I love my old dog's body? And it has really been a practice of, of acceptance, of saying, so this is how it is right now, and all these causes and conditions that come together, and I've got this old person body right now. And it has really been a help. And I just think, anyway, that animals are often some of our greatest teachers. But I feel grateful for being old, because so many people don't get to be old. So I really feel grateful. Aging is a part of life, and I'm lucky to be this old. So breathing gently, I lovingly remember that getting sick is a part of life, that illness and infirmity await me. Illness and infirmity await me. And I want to read a poem about that, a poem by Jane Kenyon. And some of you may know the Jane Kenyon story, but I don't. She was a poet, and wonderful poet. And she married, when she was a graduate student, she married her teacher, another poet, Donald Hall. And Donald Hall was about 20 years older than Jane. And they got married, and they lived, I can't remember, it was Vermont or New Hampshire, but they lived in New England, and they produced a lot of great poetry. And Donald Hall got cancer, and he was really sick and thought he might die. And Jane Kenyon took care of him, and he got through his cancer. And then Jane Kenyon gets leukemia. And Jane Kenyon died at the age of 47. And I mean, it was one of these sorts of, the expectation was always that she would outlive her husband, who had cancer. She'd taken care of him. And then here's this twist, that she's the one who becomes ill, and she's the one who dies. I think she died in 1995, and she's 47. But this is a poem that she wrote that I think is very wise. It's called Otherwise. I got out of bed on 2 strong legs. It might have been otherwise. I ate cereal, sweet milk, ripe, flawless peach. It might have been otherwise. I took the dog uphill to the birchwood. All morning, I did the work I love. At noon, I lay down with my mate. It might have been otherwise. We ate dinner together at a table with silver candlesticks. It might have been otherwise. I slept in a bed, in a room with paintings on the walls, and planned another day just like this day. But one day I know it will be otherwise. And I think what is beautiful about this poem in part is how we're able to appreciate what's good in our life right now, really having that awareness that it's impermanent, that it's inconstant, that it's going to change. Not to be in denial of either the goodness of the present moment, the pleasures of the present moment, but also not to be in denial that that the future is going to be different. And my sort of personal experience with this was a couple of years ago, early morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, and my beloved dog asked to go out. So I put on my coat, and actually in the morning, I often listen to Dharma talks. So it was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I got my phone, my ear buds in. And I'm listening to a talk on impermanence. It's December. I open the door, she goes out, and I step on the step and I fly into the air and actually break my back. So, and I did think at the moment, I thought, isn't this, I mean, there I am, you know, in pain. Isn't this ironic? Impermanence, impermanence. And fortunately, since I had my phone, I could, my sister lives with us. I called my sister because honestly, I knew if I called my husband, I don't think he'd wake up if his phone was ringing. But my sister who lives with us, I was able to call her and they got me back in the house into, you know, urgent care. And for, you know, for weeks, you know, I had to walk with a walker. But you know, it was this moment of impermanence, that things can just change on a dime. And you know, we can remember, like if you bring yourself back to early March 2020, we almost all had plans for what we were going to do that spring. And 2 weeks later, we were in lockdown. You know, I mean, that things change so quickly. So, you know, this is just this contemplation about illness and infirmity await me is really a very helpful reflection, because then when it happens, you're not surprised. Although I was surprised that it happened so quickly, I will admit that. But it was something that I had thought about quite a bit. And this is just a little side plug, but there is a wonderful book by a practitioner, Tony Bernard, T-O-N-I Bernard, called How to Be Sick. And Tony Bernard was someone who had been a dean of a law school and flew to Paris, and on the airplane got some sort of viral disease and has had a chronic, I think they call it post-viral syndrome, you know, one of these diseases that never could be quite accurately diagnosed. But this was more than 20 years ago. And since then, she does not have a day when, is this a day I get out of bed or not? I mean, it's a wonderful, and she was a wonderful practitioner. So this is a great Buddhist book about how to be sick, whether you are Buddhist or not. And it is just very practical, very sensible. And I have offered it to friends of mine who are dealing with chronic illnesses, as well as people who are caring for people with chronic illnesses. And so Tony Bernard's How to Be Sick. Okay. Breathing gently, I lovingly remember that dying is a part of life. And I always say to myself, my death approaches daily. My death approaches daily. And can we accept the idea that the time and the manner of our death may not be known? That our death may be a sudden death or it may be a prolonged death. And we just don't know. And the story that I had that brought this most acutely to me is from 1995 to 2000, I worked at a care partner for a facility for people who initially were dying with AIDS. By 2000, there were actually enough meds that people were not dying all the time. But when I first went to work there, and I worked there part-time, gave people their meds, did personal care, and most of the people died. I think the first year I was there, like 8 people died. And so there was a person there, a woman that I'd been very, very fond of. She was in her 60s, and she'd worked really hard her whole life. She'd been abandoned by her husband. She raised the 4 kids. They lived in a trailer. And she said to me, every day I had work to go to, I was so grateful. So she'd work in a canning factory, and then she'd waitress at a diner on the late shift. I mean, she was just this person who worked really hard. And late in life, she met a man who was a trucker, and they had a wonderful year together before he got sick. He was never diagnosed, but afterwards she got sick and she was diagnosed with AIDS. And she had no no resentment, no blaming, was very, very accepting, and just talked about, she'd had this wonderful year with this very loving person. And so she lived, I think I probably knew her for about 2 months before she started actively dying. And I just thought I learned so much from her about how much she valued work. She was devoted to her children, her adult children, and she slipped into a coma. And I would stand by her bedside and I'd hold her hand and I just sort of do some metta and think about how grateful I was that I had known her, that she'd really inspired me, and especially about her devotion to hard work, her gratitude for work that many people would think would not be desirable. She was really grateful that she could support her kids. And I'd leave thinking, okay, the next time I come back, she's not going to be here. And the next time I come back, she was still there, still in a coma, but she was, it was very, very peaceful. And I just thought she was sort of like the Energizer Bunny. Her heart was just so, so strong. But one night I came home thinking that this was the last time I would see this person. And my spouse came home. I worked like from 3 to 11. And he had been he played racquetball pretty seriously then. And he was in a tournament. And he was concerned about the person he was playing. He said, he's a really good player. I don't think I'm going to win this match. But he said that he beat this person, and they were in their 50s at that time, serious racquetball players, like several times a week. And he beat the person. So the person said, you won the match. Let's play another game. Let me see if I can get back my serve. And on the second serve, he dropped dead on the court. And so he came home. This was totally unexpected. This person had no idea that he had a heart condition. And when I went back the next day, this woman was still alive. And I just thought, I thought I knew that she was dying. I mean, she would die eventually, but just sort of the incommensurability in some ways of how suddenly this was, of this man in his prime, with no warning, had no idea, and me thinking, oh, I knew this person was going to die, and she hung on for much longer. So that to me was just such a remarkably instructive example of just not knowing, and of really being prepared. And at the end of his life, the Buddha had been sick for a while, and he was, and it was very painful. He had backaches. It was painful. The last few months of the Buddha's life were really difficult. The two kings who had been his supporters, King Bimbisara and King Pasenadi, both of them had been killed by their sons so that their sons could take the throne. So here are the Buddha's supporters, killed by their sons. There was a lot of warfare going on. It was a time when sort of the Gangetic Plain was moving more from sort of small republics and vassal states to larger kind of kingdoms. So there's a lot of warfare going on. The Buddha's own clan had partly been extinguished out of kind of a blood feud. And at the end of the Buddha's life, he and some monks were trying to get to the northwest part of the Gangetic Plain where he came from originally. There had recently been a schism in the Sangha, and although many of the monks had come back, there had been attempts on the Buddha's life. The Buddha's two main disciples, Sariputra and Moggallana, had both died, and Moggallana had a very violent and unpleasant death. So we tend to see these images or statues of the Buddha's parinirvana and think, oh, this looks so beautiful. But the Buddha was actually trying to move with some of his disciples to sort of get to the periphery of the Gangetic Plain. And he was very sick. And when he died probably of food poisoning. And it was a very painful death. He vomited all night. He was really sick. He had a lot of composure, but he was really sick. And he died in Nowheresville. He died in this really inauspicious little town. And that was really embarrassing to some of his disciples because, like you want to die in a sacred place, in a prominent place. So the Buddha's death was something that was not all that glorious. And there's this question, is this going to continue? It looked really inauspicious. And, I have to say, I find that kind of a comfort right now. These are really inauspicious times. These are really pretty horrible times. And I just think, okay, and the Sangha continued. It came together. Buddhism, the suttas were repeated, the oral tradition. So we have lots and lots and lots of teachings of the Buddha that we think are fairly accurate. So, that this idea about death is something that we really need to contemplate. And there's a wonderful poem by Mary Oliver, actually about the death of the Buddha. I don't know if any of you know this. It's called The Buddha's Last Instruction. Make of yourself a light, said the Buddha before he died. I think of this every morning as the East begins to tear off its many clouds of darkness to send up the first signal, a white fan streaked with pink and violet and even green. An old man, he lay down between two solitary trees. He might have said anything, knowing it was his final hour. The light burns upward, it thickens and settles over the field. Around him, the villagers gathered and stretched forward to listen. Even before the sun itself hangs, detached in the blue air, I am touched everywhere by its ocean of yellow waves. No doubt he thought of everything that had happened in his difficult life. And then I feel the sun itself as it blazes over the hills like a million flowers on fire. Clearly, I'm not needed, yet I feel myself turning into something of inexplicable value. Slowly, beneath the branches, he raises his head. He looked into the faces of that frightened crowd. And I think this is such a beautiful, imaginative interpretation of the Buddha's final hours, and how Mary Oliver takes that early morning about really recognizing the sort of comparison of the Buddha after his long life and people around him feeling frightened that he was dying, that he was leaving them. And she really recognizes that each life is so valuable and that the Buddha is a figure of great compassion and shares that. So, one of the reflections, a compassion practice, is everyone I meet will die. We are all brothers and sisters in life and in death. And so, if you are on the train or the bus or something with people, just take a moment, just breathe into that. Everyone in this room is going to die. Everyone on this bus is going to die. And feel that sort of tenderness for our human condition. So, breathing gently, I lovingly remember that loss is a part of life, that all that is dear and delightful to me will be separated from me. And this is about letting go, that at the end of our life, we let go. And And this, I think, is often one of the most challenging ideas, to trust that letting go is okay. Or my dad used to say in a very practical way, he said, you can't take it with you, whatever you have, but that, and remembering that your life may be a source of comfort to others, of inspiration, but you have to let go. And there's, I won't read the whole poem because it's getting, time is passing, but, and the end of Mary Oliver's poem in Blackwater Woods, she says, to live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. And when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, including ourselves, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. And when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. So we have those we love, those we care for, we hold them close. And the things that we care about, whether it's democracy or the environment, we hold those close, our values, what we treasure. And when we have to let go, we let go. So, and I think about, we've mentioned in here Joanna Macy, the wonderful Buddhist feminist philosopher, ecologist, imaginarian, died at 96 a couple of weeks ago. And all of the tributes to her and all of the people talking about how much she touched their lives, what a difference she made. And she was someone who was able really to let go in the end, very, very gracefully, talked about her upcoming death and her trust that people would carry on, that she could let go because others would really carry on. So finally, breathing gently, I lovingly remember that I am the inheritor of my past actions, the owner of my present actions, and the fabricator of my future actions. My actions are the ground on which I stand. And this is karma. Karma just means intentional action. So we are shaped by the choices we've made in the past. And it's not that we have complete control over everything. I mean, we're so aware of all of the causes and conditions that impinge on us. But we do make we have intentional actions of body, of speech, of mind, and that's what we're responsible for. So we're shaped by our choices, and it's how we respond to the circumstances that we find ourselves in, and that's what matters. How we respond, what we choose to do. And one of the images I have is, I always say to myself, karma is what is on my plate right now, and I don't get to eat off of anyone else's plate. So karma is kind of on what's on your plate right now, what it is that you have to deal with. So, we reflect on our intentions and their outcome. And the intention not to harm ourselves or others is probably the most basic sort of intention that we try to cultivate in the Sangha, to be non-harming, and caring for the true welfare of ourselves and for others. So it's, what we choose to do, and it's also what we choose not to do. And in some cases, it's choosing not to harm. In other cases, we may end up choosing to turn away from the suffering of another, to not to relinquish what we have, to give what we can give. That we may decide our choice might be, I don't even want to look at that. It's too painful. I don't want to know about that. So it's not just what our choices are in Catholicism. They talk about sins of commission and sins of omission. So the sins of commission are, what you choose to do. The sins of omission are what you should have done, but you chose not to do. So that's something to think about. You know, where we do we make the selfish choice not to act for the welfare of others, to act only for our own welfare. And a number of you have heard me say that I think, you know, the most remarkable thing about us as a species is our tremendous capacity for care. I mean, lots of other animals have pro-social caring behavior, but as far as we know, we're the only beings like who care about future beings, beings not yet born, and making choices about beings, you know, what is for the welfare of beings that are not yet born, and how do we act in that way to imagine what their benefit might be, and to act in accordance, and not just stay with our own what is beneficial for ourselves right now. You know, we have this tremendous capacity to care that is just extraordinary, and I think that is what's really remarkable about us as human beings. We care about people we don't know. We care about people we can only imagine. And we can care about animals. We can care about the environment. We have this tremendous capacity for care. And that's really where karma is. You know, what we choose to think, what we choose to say, what we choose to do. And so I want to end with a wonderful, this is the last paragraph from a book called Lotus Girl, My Life at the Crossroads of Buddhism in America. And it's by Helen Tworkov, who was I think she's in her 80s now, but she was the founding editor of Tricycle, the Buddhist Review, and she was the editor for about 30 years. And this is what she has to say. This is the last paragraph of the book. What feels newly born is recognizing the benefits of my current situation, appreciating the multiple opportunities for intensifying awareness of things as they are, and of connecting to a state of mind, to an open heart, to a diamond core within the intrinsic capacity to survive being a stranger, even to myself, or living exiled within my native country. To steady myself on the path of awakening, I could not ask for more favorable conditions than being in the bardo of old age, in a country that is falling apart, and in a world on fire. I have been dealt an extraordinary hand. The rest is up to me. I'll read that last sentence. To steady myself on the path of awakening, I could not ask for more favorable conditions than being in the bardo of old age, in a country that is falling apart, and in a world on fire. I have been dealt an extraordinary hand. The rest is up to me. So thank you for your kind attention. And I think we've got some announcements, and then people can stay and do small groups if they'd like.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Good. Thank you for coming. We will try and put people into small groups afterwards. However, we would really appreciate those of you that can, who could take a couple of folding chairs down the stairs to the right and to the right before you leave today. The next topic is Dharma. As you know, Common Ground operates on this principle, which roughly speaking means generosity. And Pali doesn't translate great into English. So we like to explain that it's important to give and receive freely, meaning you should feel comfortable about it, and it should give you joy to give. And everything here at Common Ground is offered freely. We don't charge for anything. And this place does have expenses, as does our retreat land, which you might want to check out in Western Wisconsin. So the way we handle Donna in these meetings is when there is a guest teacher like Patrice, who is not a member of the staff, she will get 2/3 of the donations put in the center bowl today. And you can also make donations directly to the retreat center or to the general fund. There's 3 openings on the little table out in front. So we also have a type of computer where you can make a donation with your credit card. It's actually quite simple, and we'll be happy to help you with that. So consider it. And as far as what's coming up in the future, I'm afraid I haven't looked at it, but there will be several half-day and full-day retreats, which tend to happen on Saturdays here. And we have retreats in the city, and we also have residential retreats out at our Prairie Farm Retreat Center in Western Wisconsin. So you can find that out by looking at our newsletter and online, which is the way I usually do it, at commongroundmeditation.org. And you will find an incredible number of things to become involved with here. So please partake. And again, thank you.
Kirby.